Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just one moment. Good day and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Since AJC launched the Mayors United Against Antisemitism initiative together with the U.S. Conference of Mayors in late January, over 360 mayors across the United States have signed the statement declaring unequivocally that antisemitism is incompatible with the democratic values that are at the very bedrock of our society. We are delighted to be joined today by U.S. Conference of Mayors President Mayor Greg Fischer of Louisville, Kentucky, and U.S. Conference of Mayors Second Vice President Mayor Francis Suarez of Miami, Florida, for a bipartisan discussion on the impact of this powerful partnership in the fight against antisemitism and bigotry. Moderating today's discussion is Melanie Marampel, AJC Chief Field Operations Officer. After we hear from Melanie and our esteemed guests, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org, that's questions plural, or use the Q&A feature in Zoom. But before turning it over to our mayors, we are delighted to welcome U.S. Conference of Mayors CEO and Executive Director Tom Cochran. Melanie, Tom, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Daniel. And Tom, we are just delighted to have you here to help us kick off today's discussion. This partnership between AJC and the U.S. Conference of Mayors is so extraordinarily beneficial for us. We're so grateful for this partnership. And so we're happy to have you welcome our viewers to today's program.
Thank you so much, Melanie. As we say, I'm Tom Cochran. I'm the CEO of the U.S. Conference of Mayors here in Washington, D.C. And thank you so much for convening this session, including two of our great leaders of the Conference of Mayors, our president, Mayor Fischer of Louisville, and our second vice president, Mayor Suarez down in Miami. The conference values our partnership with AJC. It started with mayors' missions to Israel, and it extends to issues of mutual concern of both of our organizations today. Anti-Semitism is such an issue. As you know, in the last 5 years, we've had a significant increase to hate crimes directed at individuals and institutions based on faith, with the biggest increase among those incidents having been those directed against Jewish people. We've always called on mayors to speak out against hate crimes. It's our heritage, it's our history. We will do it whenever and wherever it occurs. The sign-on statement is a joint initiative of the Conference of Mayors and AJC, and it provides a way for mayors to register their opposition to this dramatic increase of anti-Semitism and work together to reverse it. I'm pleased to report that more than 365 mayors have now signed on, and Melanie, they keep coming in. So the signatures are coming in and we're increases. Now, this is more than just a sign-on statement. Our history is strong. In 2019, the conference adopted a resolution. That's our official policy adopted by the mayors around the nation of our organization that states that mayors have a responsibility to protect their cities by recognizing and confronting the growing threat of hate crimes and related violence, recognize the increase of acts of violence and aggression targeting individuals and institutions based on faith, strongly denounce anti-Semitism, bigotry against Muslims, and all forms of racism is not a part of our American values. And inside our organization, through our Mayors and Business Leaders Center for Equitable and Compassionate Cities, we are working to support mayors' efforts in the cities to show what good things are happening around our nation, to be more compassionate and to do the kind of things that's also following up on the resolution that was passed to breathe life into it. So Melanie, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today at this session, and we look forward to our future working together with you and your great organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. And now I am delighted to welcome my mayor from Louisville, Kentucky, Mayor Greg Fischer, and the mayor of Miami, Florida, Mayor Francis Suarez. Good afternoon, mayors.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Melanie, good to be with you.
Good to see you both. So as Tom mentioned, and I really just want to thank Tom again for those introductory remarks and for really framing this, because I think it's important for everyone to understand that as individual mayors, but also as the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which represents 1,300, you can correct me on the numbers, more than 1,300 mayors across the U.S., that this is something you see as a priority. So for us, we launched this initiative with the U.S. Conference on January 27th, which was International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which we thought was a fitting day to launch our Mayors United Against Antisemitism initiative, which actually revived something we did in 2015, where we had a similar initiative that was focused really on Europe, saying we were asking American mayors to call on their European counterparts to speak out and combat the rising violent anti-Semitism that was taking place across Europe. But now here we are, it's 2021, and we've experienced in the intervening years the horrors of Pittsburgh, the horrors of Poway, Jersey City, violent assaults against Jewish communities, Jewish institutions, and Jewish landmarks, from Brooklyn to Tulsa to Lexington to Los Angeles. And we felt it was really important, again, to bring together the voices of the mayors from across the country to say enough. So you are both in positions of leadership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and we're just so grateful that you were among our very first signatories. And Mayor Fischer, I'll start with you. Why did you feel it was important to be part of this?
Well, to your point, Melanie, if you don't stand up and say enough, we see what happens. And history shows us that. And as mayors, if you don't run for office with a belief that we're interdependent, that we're all in this together, that our differences are what really is our strength, then you shouldn't run for mayor. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I want to thank you guys for putting on the program too. And Melanie, thank you for being a great Louisvillian as well. But I relish every opportunity I have to talk about discrimination, that fight against anti-Semitism, against any type of difference, if you will. You know, when you think about us bonded as one humanity, we come together around universal values of compassion, of kindness, and love. And then there's secondary differences we have as humans. It could be political party, it could be skin color, it could be religion, what have you. Mayors, as a central point in our cities, it's important for us to use our, what I call our secular pulpit, to remind people that we're bounded together by these human values. Everything else is inconsequential. And so mayors have got to shout from the rooftops on that and be teachers in their communities to people that maybe have not heard or appreciated the interdependence that we so exist on or we rely on in our cities. So any opportunity we have to speak to this topic and live to these values each and every day, we do in our community. As you know, last night we had a conversation that you were listening to, a virtual community with our immigrant and our foreign-born community, to talk about the beauty and value we have of our pluralistic society and how important it is that all religions play in our community. So it's just constantly talking and sending that message as a community so that we're not isolated, that we're in fact interdependent and so much more beautiful that way.
Thank you. And Mayor Suarez, how about for you? What inspired you to sign on so quickly?
You know, Melanie, first of all, I want to echo President Fischer's comments and in thanking you for hosting this and for inviting me. It's a tremendous honor. And it's very difficult to express it any more eloquently than the way our president expressed it. The truth of the matter is we're bonded with Israel in terms of the fact that our community is a community in many ways of exiles. We share common values in terms of our premium on family and education. We share a common connection. Miami is sort of the Tel Aviv, you know, Miami is the Miami of the United States, is the Tel Aviv of Israel. And so I would say lastly, we have a tremendously robust and vibrant Jewish community in our city. So for me, as the mayor so eloquently put it, our diversity as a city is our strength. We have to protect every single race, religious, creed. Otherwise, we, first of all, we go to lawlessness. And secondly, it's important for us to make sure that we're upholding our own values, and our values are values of tolerance and values of acceptance and values of commonality. And so, as mayor of a city with such a vibrant Jewish and Israeli presence, it was, really easy, frankly, for me to sign on and to say that enough is enough, and that we will not stand for any kind of discrimination. We will not stand for any kind of anti-Semitism in our community or in any parts of the world. And I'll just finish by saying something that the president said. As elected officials, we're called upon to be leaders. We're called upon to speak very clearly about issues of importance, not just to our cities, but to the world. And I want to thank Tom, who came on as the executive director of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, because the conference has a role to play that is bigger than any one mayor and bigger than any one city. And that role is speaking on behalf of all of us. And so I think his posture on this issue has been very clear. And we're going to continue to be that way because we're a very well-led organization.
That's great. Thank you. It's heartening to hear you both say this. We know that one of the really sad realities of anti-Semitism and one of the challenges that we have in combating it is that there's not one source. It emanates from a really wide range of sources. And we know, just like the US Conference of Mayors, anti-Semitism is nonpartisan. We really do see it in all of its different manifestations. We see it on the far right. We see it on the far left. We see it sometimes cloaked in this anti-Zionism, anti-Israel. And to be clear, this is not about trying to chill anyone's criticisms of Israel. Israel is, subject to criticism as any other nation is. But there are times when there is a morphing of anti-Israel criticism and critique that goes far beyond and turns into a form of anti-Semitism. We see it in the form of religious extremism. We see it where there is no discernible political ideology, but really just a sort of othering. We know that both Louisville and Miami have very vibrant Jewish communities, very different Jewish communities, but very vibrant Jewish communities. But we also see anti-Semitism in communities with virtually no Jews or very few Jews. So I always find it refreshing to see how, as mayors, you can engage in this bipartisan way, in a bipartisan discussion. We also know that this is sometimes, the Jewish community is sometimes used, or we feel like we're being used or manipulated as a wedge, and that we're trying to be pulled to one camp or other. But we want to ensure that the fight against anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry really remains a bipartisan fight. So how can we do that? What is it that we can continue to do to ensure this fight remains bipartisan and that it's not used as a wedge issue? And Mayor Fischer, I'll start with you.
It's a great question because it allows us to really explore our humanity, right? I mean, when you think about, let's say, political debate, the bullies, the bad politicians try to divide, right? Politics, poli, the people, I'm married to a Greek woman, so I can say these things, is about amplifying our human potential, right? And you don't do that by bullying and dividing people. And so, this is where we see most of the problems come in, when people become isolated and they just view the world in a very narrow sense versus viewing the world in a very broad sense, which beautifies the world and beautifies the potential of the world. But there have been cheap political artists over the years that use division as their tool to gain power. We've seen that we saw it in Germany. We've seen that in America. It led up to the January 6th insurrection here. And so, being a citizen is not a spectator sport, right? I mean, you got to get on the field. You got to get in the arena, and you have to condemn anybody that's bullying people. Discrimination is a form of bullying people. Isolating someone because of their difference, whatever that secondary difference might be, religion, skin color, I've said about that, is a form of intellectual weakness that undermines our very potential that we have as people. So that's why it's important that, like Mayor Suarez I saw we're on here because he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat. It's like, well, okay, I forgot about that. Because we don't see each other that way. We're just mayors trying to lift up our cities. And I was proud, Melanie, here, if you haven't figured it out, to our viewers, we both live in Louisville, but our Kentucky legislature this week or this past week, Republican-controlled House and Senate, Democratic governor, one resolution condemning anti-Semitism. No room for it here in our Commonwealth and our city as well. So that has to be the norm, so that those that seek to divide say, I got a strong opposition here. And we have to continue bringing this message of anti-hate to make sure it has no place, because it'll pop up with little extremism every once in a while, or broader, like we saw on January 6th. So you can never let your guard down.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned the really important action taken by the Kentucky legislature and the governor. And the governor declared the month of March as Anti-Semitism Awareness and Mitigation Month, which I think it's the first in the nation. I don't know. We'll have to fact check that. But I think, I hope this is something that other states and communities can pick up on and really emulate, because I think it's an important step. One of the things Governor Fischer of Kentucky said too, when in his little video announcing this, was anti-Semitism is nonpartisan. It's not a partisan issue, it's a people issue. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, and certainly what we see too. Mayor Suarez, you also have taken proactive steps in Miami. You introduced a resolution to the City Council that was adopted that endorses the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. This is a definition that AJC also believes is critically important. In order to combat something, you have to be able to define it. And this is really the gold standard of definitions. So I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about that resolution and what you see. Are there ways to give that some teeth? And what other roles can you take in your administration and your administrative role to help combat anti-Semitism?
Well, like you said, that resolution was important because it's very hard to know something is something unless you define it very clearly, and you want to make sure that that you're capturing the conduct. I think just to take a quick step back on the last question, I think it's extremely dangerous for some issues to become partisan, and this is one of them. You know what I mean? I think the creating this into a partisan issue is diluting the issue, and I think that is critically important. I was blessed to work with Brian Siegel on publishing an op-ed on the new and evolving forms of anti-Semitism around the world and in the U.S., of course. And as you said, we updated the working definition of anti-Semitism and asked the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and joined our group, of course, of mayors that are against anti-Semitism. I think it's important that, in terms of giving it teeth, and in terms of, first of all, I think the first thing that's important is when something happens, there needs to be more than just a statement. That's my humble opinion. I think there needs to be action, and frankly, even if it happens somewhere else, what happened in Pittsburgh, we acted here in Miami. We sent police officers to all our synagogues. We wanted to make sure that the Jewish community felt protected, that they felt that we were not going to allow a copycat incident to happen in a city like ours. So I think there has to be real action when something occurs. We can't just assume that it's not going to happen in our community, because it can happen in our community. We don't want to be the next community that happens in. I think the second thing is, we have to always, just like we're always updating our definitions of what kinds of actions constitute anti-Semitism, we should update our laws, right? And we should look at the severity of punishment, because I think obviously any kind of hate crimes are things that should have enhanced punishment, because they go beyond the normal crimes of passion or things that can happen in a given moment. They're premeditated oftentimes. They're meant to create some sort of a symbol, right? It's more than just a crime. It's meant to demoralize. It's meant to inculcate fear, and it's meant to make a political statement sometimes, or a religious statement. And so I think it's imperative that we understand that kind of conduct deserves enhanced penalties associated with it, because we really, 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 as a society, need to make sure that we don't accept that kind of conduct. And as the president said, President Fischer said, it's not just in this discussion. It's in all kinds of different discriminations. Whether it's gender-based, whether it's sex-based, whether it's sexual orientation-based, whether it's race-based. Those are all kinds of things that, as a society that believes in humanity, and I love the way he puts it, believes in our humanity, then we have to go the extra mile to make sure that these kinds of statements that we make are more than just statements.
And Mayor Fischer, what about, we know that in some countries, for example, and this is something that we're in conversation with other countries, with other cities about, is a point person in administrations like an anti-Semitism czar, or someone who can be really attuned to the community, but also to the many sources, again, because we know it manifests in so many different ways and can help work to implement these strategies. But just curious, in your administration here in Louisville, how do you see this? How do you see the issue of anti-Semitism being addressed? And do you have specific people who work with the Jewish community? How do you approach the issue?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just make a comment about the general kind of culture of the city. So we're the home of the first Jewish Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis. He's part of who we are. We're the home of Muhammad Ali, one of the world's great humanitarians. Thomas Merton had his famous epiphany on interdependence at 4th and Walnut Street in downtown Louisville. And then, of course, our Center for Interfaith Relations is going over, this will be its 26th, 27th year this year. So this notion of pluralism and anti-discrimination is baked into who we are. And so when I became mayor, and it was about 10 years ago, I said 3 values going to drive our city of lifelong learning, an even healthier city, and an even more compassionate city. And we define compassion as respect for every resident so that their full human potential is flourishing. Okay, it's an action word. And then just before this event, we launched our Give a Day Festival, which is our festival of compassion, which goes on for the entire month of April. We set world records every year for compassionate activities. And so Janice Cates is our Director of Compassion Initiatives. That's her official title. So we're approaching it through a proactive lens of compassion and kindness and love, these universal values that take place here. And then, of course, within that falls, if there's any act of discrimination, it's addressed directly, community-wide. It might be if there's some hatred on a mosque or a temple or painted there, 1,000 people will show up to respond to a job that maybe requires 2 people in 4 hours, to just have these waves of expression from our city that this is not tolerated here and this is not who we are. And I think it's a big part of my job, like I'm the anti-discrimination, anti-Semitism czar in the community. I do not hesitate to talk about these issues. And I talk about compassion every day. And again, it gets back to this notion of any type of bullying that takes place on anybody. It's the job of any leader, especially the mayor, to address these type of things. So it's intentional, it's cultural, and it's action oriented.
So one of the things that Tom mentioned in his intro was that AJC, in partnership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, in non-COVID years, has taken delegations of mayors to Israel, and I know we've been trying to get both of you on one of our trips, and hopefully the timing will work out. Maybe 2021 later in the year is the year.
I hope so.
I know, when things can open up again. But one of the things we do as part of every delegation that we bring to Israel is we go to Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust memorial. And we had a moment with a delegation of mayors where there was this sort of aha moment where they saw that mayors were complicit in the Holocaust and were complicit in enabling their Jewish communities to be deported and ultimately murdered. And there was this sort of moment that where they realized all over again. I'm sure it wasn't the first time, but it was certainly a moment where they saw that their moral leadership had power, and that the role of the office is a powerful, powerful role. So I'm just thinking how, and you've addressed it a little bit, but if you can speak to the role of being the voice of moral clarity. You're not there, you are there because people need potholes fixed. We know this, they need the water, clean water to come out of the faucet when they turn it on. They need the snow shoveled, not in Miami, but they also need a voice of moral clarity when something bad is happening. And I know you both take that responsibility seriously. And Mayor Suarez, maybe you can start and just speak to, in this context, the role of the mayor.
So first of all, I've been to Yad Vashem, and it's an incredibly overwhelming experience, to see in a very intimate way, all the things that happened during the Holocaust, and to almost re-experience it in a way, because it's sensory overload, in terms of being involved in a place and seeing very intimately all the things that happened, how they happened, when they happened, the horror and the massacre. It's just something that, by the way, I recommend that every person on the planet should at some point see it, because it shows what we as a human race are capable of. I think one of the things that when I was there, I thought to myself, this is what human beings are capable of doing. And that's something that we can never forget. It's almost like a check on ourselves. So that's one thing I just wanted to express. The second thing is, one of the things I've learned in the short time that I've been mayor, and the longer time that I've been a public official, I've been a public official now for 11 years. It seems like they're dog years, but but one of the things I've learned is our most important job, and the job where I think we have the biggest influence, is expressing moral clarity over decision making. That is our most important job. I think all the other jobs that we do pale in comparison. Different cities are run in different ways. They have different power structures, as well. Some mayors are strong mayors, and some mayors are executive mayors, and some mayors, are on the council. But I think we always have a voice, and I've learned that particularly in the last year, during COVID, and is that we have a voice, and our voice is the most powerful tool that we have, and the ability to congregate, the ability to get the attention of the press and to make a statement, which means we can talk to everybody. Essentially, we can communicate with every single person. That's the most powerful tool that a mayor has, period. I don't care how many people you can fire. I don't care how many people you can hire. I don't care about anything else. The most powerful tool that you have is the ability to communicate directly with every single person in your city. And so, you're right that, speaking out in the face of adversity is something that is incredibly important in terms of how we will be judged in our leadership position. It's something that we struggle, and I'm going to say this very openly, and I hope, Mr. President, I hope I'm not saying anything out of turn. It's something that we struggle with as a conference, right? We are a bipartisan organization, and sometimes political actors do things that we feel a desire to condemn, and it creates some, friction, or creates some hesitancy, or creates some tension. But I think the conference has done a magnificent job, particularly with our president and particularly with our executive director, in navigating those turbulent waters and finding a moral clarity, a crystal clarity through, to be an organization that has credibility, and to be an organization that will never lose its compass in terms of expressing that moral clarity, which again is our greatest tool. So I'm glad you brought up the question, because I think it's probably the most relevant question we've had to answer.
And Melanie, when we created our Center for Equitable and Compassionate Cities at the U.S. Conference of Mayors a couple of years ago, because we wanted to make a very clear statement on behalf of the mayors of America how important compassion and equity is. And we took 2 trips as we were kind of framing up our thoughts for that. One is we went to Montgomery, Alabama, and worked with Brian Stevenson down there. And then we went to Poland and visited Auschwitz, and had those as kind of the foundational experiences for launching this center that we had. And so, when you're at Auschwitz and you're at a physical place, as many people I'm sure have been here on this call, and you just wonder how the depth of evil and hatred could have taken place at that spot. And how did it get to that? in who were these mayors that supposedly were leaders of their cities that allowed this to happen to their people. And to who is your obligation to? Is it to go along because of some rabid leader that you feel like you must follow because the downside is worse for you? Or is it to your fellow citizens and their humanity and their need to live and just take care of their families? And, so the check, as Mayor Suarez was saying, is, you can't compromise on issues of morality and equal treatment and humanity and these human values that we talked about, because look what happens. And again, we can never say this could not happen in the United States of America. What happened here on January 6th? That was surreal. I mean, intellectually you could see it happening, but emotionally it's like, is this what we've come to as a country? And some people will say, well, that's not who we are. Well, I'm sorry, it is who we are because it happened. And so these have got to be, punches in the gut for us as a society to say, whoa, we've got to pull back here. And to Mayor Suarez's point here, these are bigger issues than a Republican Party or Democratic Party or an independent here in America, right? These are issues of humanity that the Conference of Mayors' moral voice needs to be really clear on. And so this is a great organization, our Conference of Mayors, and we're obviously very proud of it, because we don't look at each other as political parties. We look at us as aspirational humanitarians trying to lift up all of our citizens so that their full human potential is flourishing. That's what a city is, a platform for human potential to flourish. And the more we as mayors can bring as many different people together to make that happen, the greater the opportunities are going to be for us. So that's our role as mayor. And hatred and bigotry is nowhere in that job description.
I want to just clarify, Mayor Suarez, you noted Brian Siegel. I want to make sure everyone understands Brian Siegel is our phenomenal director of AJC Miami and has had such a great relationship with you. We have regional offices across the country. We have 24 regional offices. So if there are mayors watching and you don't already know your AJC representative, we'd be happy to connect you. And we're really excited about the relationships we have both with the U.S. conference and with individual mayors across the country. It's really, really important. I want to pick up on something that you're alluding to. One of the really troubling things we're still seeing, that we've been seeing throughout this really challenging COVID year, and we are now at the, really the 1 year mark of where so many things locked down. I think I took my last flight exactly 1 year ago today. But we know that there is so much disinformation and misinformation, and that it has led to all kinds of new conspiracy theories. We've seen many anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. We're certainly seeing this awful, awful spike of violent crimes against Asian American communities, Asian communities across the US. And we absolutely unequivocally stand in solidarity with our Asian community partners, and we'll do whatever we can to ensure that those are addressed as well. But so much of this is fueled by misinformation, disinformation. And again, do you see yourselves in the platform you have, the microphone you have, both as mayors, but also as leaders of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, in trying to dispel disinformation? And how can we do more of that? And Mayor Fischer, I'll start with you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, absolutely. Ideally, a mayor is a voice of clarity. People's trust in government is being stretched right now, right? Still the most trusted level of government is local government. Because we live with our constituents, we're not removed from them. And so it's important for us not just to kind of speak to these issues of disinformation, but then also to develop systems or initiatives that educate and teach. After the horrors of Charlottesville, where you saw anti-Semitic activity, Klan marching, et cetera, that's when I said, this is not America. One of my staffers here, Katie Dalinger, said, no, Mayor, this is America. And I said, well, we launched an initiative called Lean Into Louisville, which is initiative, education initiative, leaning into all forms of discrimination and hate. Because I do find that people of goodwill want to learn more about all of these issues, but they haven't been taught. They don't know where to go for information. So Lean Into Louisville provides that type of collection point for them. And the goal is to build from the middle out, not from the extremes in, because the extremes are always going to be there. And then frankly, they're not really interested in compromise and learning, but there is a big center that wants to get a lot bigger as well. So that's how you can scale up a mayor's ability in addition to individual press conferences that you might be having or individual responses to incidents. But then how do you build systems that build social muscle in your city, like Lean Into Louisville? Or our Compassionate School project is the biggest project of its kind in the world, integrating compassion into our elementary school curriculum so that our youngest citizens are learning about these universal values that I've talked about of compassion and love and rejecting hate and anti-Semitism. And you start that at a very early age, so those type of muscles start being cultivated. So we've got a lot of different ways we as mayors can attack these issues and build the potential of our cities.
Mayor Suarez, did you want to add there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say briefly that there is no doubt in my mind that there is an assault on truth in our society. And I think, you talked about sort of conspiracy theories and, and by the way, some of it, in fairness, has been brought upon by the press itself. But when you start talking about, when you start creating concepts that put in doubt in the minds of regular citizens as to what the truth is, and when truth is relative, right, it can just be spun in any direction, that is very frightening. It is extremely frightening. We know that, Nazi Germany used disinformation and information as a means of thought control and manipulation. And that is, again, something that we have to be very vigilant about. Obviously, there's a variety of platforms where information is being put out. And I think we have to figure out as a society how we're going to come up with structures to understand what is true and what is false. And it sounds almost like elementary, right? It sounds like we're talking about to a second grade class about, hey, is it true that the sky behind me is blue? Clearly it is, right? Things like that. But there has been a real assault on the concept of truth. And I think that's something that we have to continue to talk about. We have to have a broader conversation about and be thoughtful about how we're going to combat that.
There are a couple of tools I want to also mention that and offer to both of you, to any of our viewers, anyone watching, and then also one of our advocacy objectives. So first, AJC developed a resource that we call Translate Hate that takes some of the common anti-Semitic tropes and terms and phrases and explains their origins. First of all, many of them have medieval origins, but also then shows how they're used in a contemporary context and how some of the terms we see, sort of where they came from and how we want to make sure everyone's antenna are up when they hear these terms so they understand them. So that is a tool that's on our resource, on our website, ajc.org, that again is called Translate Hate. We recently presented both Translate Hate and a survey, and I know Mayor Fischer, certainly, I think Mayor Suarez too, you are innovation and data people. So I know the data is really important. We surveyed both American Jews and non-Jews in America about their perceptions of anti-Semitism, not their perceptions of Jews, but their perceptions about the prevalence of anti-Semitism in society. And as you might imagine, the Jewish community is incredibly concerned. The numbers were really high in terms of the feeling that anti-Semitism is on the rise. It's getting worse. We're seeing it in more ways than we did before. And there was a disconnect between the way Jews felt and the way the non-Jews perceived the issue of anti-Semitism, where they didn't necessarily see it as being such an issue. So we're trying to understand that gap. But we recently presented both our survey and Translate Hate to the National Association of Attorneys General. And it was a really interesting conversation. It's the kind of information, we're eager to share with your administrations, with mayors, et cetera. So that's one resource we can offer. But then also we're working to advance, and we're hoping it will be reintroduced in Congress very soon, the No Hate Act. And the No Hate Act is an act of Congress that would create grants for state and local governments to help improve their hate crimes data collection and the hate crimes reporting. We know that the numbers are woefully underreported. We know that many communities simply don't have a mechanism or a means to collect the data. The data being collected is, there's a lot of disparities between community to community. There are major cities that report zero hate crimes because they're not collecting the data. We think that having some sort of standardized mechanism and help to state and local governments to do this would be really important. So that's one of our objectives that we're working on, not just as AJC, but also with our Muslim partners, our community partners, et cetera. So I just want to put those out there and make sure you're aware of all of that. So I think at this point, Daniel, I think we can open this up to some of our viewer questions. We'll take a few questions and then we'll conclude in a few minutes or so.
Thank you, Melanie. Our first question comes from Nicole Schneider, who's asking on Zoom if either or both of you can speak to what is actually being done, perhaps in the classrooms, to educate youth in your cities on anti-Semitism.
I'll start that. I mentioned earlier, it's not specifically anti-Semitism, but it's anti-discrimination of all forms. And that's part of our Compassionate Schools project. In our public school system here is about 100,000 kids or so. It's focused on the elementary areas. So we're starting young with them, but being very clear about the importance of the positive human values around compassion, as I spoke about here earlier. So to make sure that these young kids at an early age are understanding what love of self is, that has to be present. Unfortunately, some kids that come from really challenged environments early on, they don't know how to love themselves. And yet we have an expectation in our society for them to be able to work with teams of people to get things done, which requires empathy. So it teaches love of self and then empathy. And a big part of that obviously is anti-discrimination, but not specifically around anti-Semitism, but any form of hatred.
No, I think it's an opportunity in our community, without a doubt, to be more specific about some of the anti-hate, educational initiatives that we engage in. I think it is a good idea to sort of differentiate and go to a little bit more of a granular level. So that's something that I'm gonna look into. We don't control in the city our school system, so it's a whole different government, unfortunately. But it's something that certainly is worth looking into and seeing and getting more information on, and potentially proposing that it be done at a more granular level.
And Melanie, related to that, I just would like to make a pitch for us as a country to start talking about mandatory national service as something that everybody should go through as a rite of passage as a young adult, so that we can get in the trenches with each other, whether it's in the physical trenches or in the classroom or public health areas, so that, we know each other. I mean, rural, urban, Black, white, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, we've lost that way, and when you take a look back at previous, and history is always changing, but when you take a look back in our post-World War II era, and certainly we had problems back then as well, but when you look at our senior leaders compromising with each other, they worked with each other in our military efforts, right? And there was a bigger goal out there. And I think we really have lost our way on that as a country right now. We got to start looking at systems to bring us back together, so we don't look at somebody from out in the rural hinterlands that Christian and I'm a hip young Jewish multi or biracial person. It's like, no, we're the same thing. So I just want to put a plug in that. Let's be talking that back up. Mayor Suarez, what do you think?
No, I 100% agree. And in fact, Israel does that. You know what I mean? I think compulsory service is something that, like you said, it breaks barriers down. It, first of all, it creates a tremendous amount of pride in national pride. Secondly, it just like any kind of service, particularly military service, like you said, you get to meet people of all different racial backgrounds, economic backgrounds. It makes everybody, feel equal, a sense of equality and a sense that we're all in it together. I love the idea. I think it's wonderful. And I'd love to write an article with you on it, because I think that's something that we should push for in this administration.
By the way, one of the other things that we see, and again, this, I know that Mayor Suarez, what you've done in terms of making Miami the, innovation center that you have, that we see in Israel, is that the people who serve together often go on to form startups together, or they're connected to one another post service. That's the business network that they then develop. So, but that's where they meet.
There's no doubt about it. That school, there are points in life where you get connected with people and you form lifelong bonds. So to Mayor Fischer's point, and the President's point, which is this could be a place where you're creating lifelong bonds, lifelong friendships with people around a very positive virtue, which is to serve.
Well, and you could be intentional, right? Teach innovation, teach tolerance, teach some of these values that we're missing in our country right now. These are not political things, right? We got to come back toward our humanity. And could you imagine if the United States of America had the innovation quotient as Israel does per capita? My gosh,
So actually, I want to pick up and ask you a question, because one of the mayors that we took to Israel is Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who actually talked about how his service in the military did exactly what you're describing, exposed him to people from, backgrounds and places that he would never have otherwise met, and how important that was for him. But he also is a former mayor who understands innovation, understands how cities work. I'm wondering, just if you want to comment on the fact that we now have 2 mayors in this administration. I don't know if Marty Walsh has been confirmed yet? I don't know if he's had his confirmation yet. I don't think so. But the role of mayors in terms of bringing that the viewpoint and vantage point of mayors, and with in particular the view of innovation to these important positions within the administration. You want to comment?
I think it brings great. I'm overusing the word humanity in our special session today, because I'm an entrepreneur that just happens to be a mayor. I'm not a lifelong politico. So I feel like I'm kind of grounded in how things work. And if you have people that have been not in the business area or been legislators their whole life, it doesn't bring the reality of, okay, how do we get this done? So when you have mayors in the cabinet, that's going to be one of the first things they think about. Okay, great idea, all this, but how do we execute this to scale? Number one. And then number two, and the Biden administration clearly has a North Star on equity already. It's like, as a mayor, most of the challenges that we deal with are issues related to poverty, right? And issues related to challenges of then who most of the people are in poverty, which is most of our primarily Black and brown communities. So how do we have equitable innovation to scale, and to make sure that conversation is taking place daily in the White House? I think would be a tremendous value.
Daniel, you want to ask our next question?
Yeah, so I have a question actually I think would be great to hear from both of you on, and perhaps Mayor Suarez, we'll begin with you. This is from Ellen Schneier in New York. There seems to be incredible momentum with this, the Mayors United Against Antisemitism initiative. How can the U.S. conference keep this up? And in other words, what have you learned from this specific campaign, and what do you see as the next steps in your responsibilities as both mayors and leadership in the conference?
Oh, we're blessed. You have the president here who has focused his entire presidency on like he says, you can never use that word too much, promoting humanity. And I think for us, we have to look at what are the things that we can do to continue to discuss this issue, to highlight the issue, to have, as Melanie said earlier, to have laws that have real teeth, and to take real concrete action on issues like that. If I could go back to the last question for a second, I would just say that I think having mayors continue to take leadership positions in government is really an indication of how our sort of bipartisan or nonpartisan, no nonsense approach to making decisions is resonating with the public. You have multiple mayoral, mayors that are presidential candidates, and that rhetoric and the way they talk, which is different, I think is really resonating with people, and it's giving mayors opportunities to lead and have a higher profile, which I think is important.
Another way to go about that is to reward and recognize good work. Okay, so when you're trying to transform, you've got to set goals, you have to have moral clarity, but then you've got to recognize where good work is happening and reward that good work in order to embed this in the culture as something that's valued. So this is the next step we're working on with our Center for Compassionate and Equitable Cities now, to have annually rewards for big, medium-sized, small cities that are demonstrating excellence in these areas, so that other mayors, when they come to our annual conferences, hopefully we'll get back to those in person, we'll see the city of Miami being recognized for its distinguished work in anti-Semitism activity as demonstrated through this series of actions. And a new mayor who doesn't know any difference is going to show up to their first meeting and say, well, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So I want just to kind of emphasize the importance of highlighting this good work. This is not do good work. This is, essential to the moral fiber of our country and our cities.
Well, I think this has been yet another inspiring conversation with both of you. We're really so grateful. We're grateful to you. We're grateful again to the mayors, the 360 something, 70 something mayors that have now signed on to the Mayors United Against Antisemitism initiative. We're so grateful to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and to Tom Cochran for his leadership and for the conference's leadership on these issues. And we're really eager to be a partner with the conference, with both of you, with again, as I said, we are present in all 50 states, even if we have offices in 24 communities. We really have reach to all 50 states. So we're eager to connect with mayors wherever we can. We're also eager, again, to get back to taking mayors to Israel, which we know is so critically important for all of these reasons. With this, I want to thank you both, and I'm going to hand it back to Daniel for some final remarks.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Mayors Fischer and Suarez, for joining us today. I'd also like to thank our global audience for joining us. If you want to learn more about our Mayors initiative, please visit ajc.org/mayors. And if you enjoyed today's program, please consider making a donation to AJC at ajc.org/donate. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.